They said women couldn't handle the pressure of real explosives. Lieutenant Sarah Chen had heard that whisper follow her through 8 years of military service. And now, 3 years into civilian life, she was about to prove them catastrophically wrong when a terrorist's bomb threatened to turn downtown Seattle into a crater that would claim 10,000 innocent lives. Sarah adjusted the radio volume in her modest Toyota Camry as she navigated the morning traffic toward her job at Northwest Community College. The dashboard clock read 7:42 a.m., giving her just enough time to grab coffee before her first class. She taught basic electronics to adult learners, mostly veterans like herself trying to transition into civilian careers. It was honest work, meaningful work, but a far cry from the adrenaline-fueled world she'd left behind. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a woman of 32 with sharp brown eyes and black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup adorned her face, and her clothing was deliberately unremarkable. Dark jeans, a navy sweater, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. She'd learned to dress down, to blend in, to avoid the attention that had once followed her everywhere. She went. The small apartment she'd left that morning told the same story of deliberate ordinariness. IKEA furniture, generic artwork, nothing that spoke to her past except for a single shadow box on the bedroom dresser. Inside lay a bronze star, medal, and an Army Commendation Medal, both earned in Afghanistan during tours that officially never happened. Most days, she managed to walk past it without looking. Her students at Northwest Community College knew her as Miss Chen, the patient instructor who could explain circuit boards and electrical systems with unusual clarity. They appreciated her hands-on teaching style and her ability to break down complex concepts into manageable pieces. What they didn't know was that her expertise came from years of studying the electrical signatures of improvised explosive devices, learning to read the deadly language of wires and timers that separated life from death. The college itself was unremarkable, a cluster of low brick buildings serving working-class students who couldn't afford traditional universities. Sarah had chosen it deliberately, drawn to its mission of providing second chances to people who'd been overlooked by the traditional education system. Veterans made up nearly 30% of the student body, many struggling with the transition from military to civilian life. Her classroom was in Building C, a converted warehouse with concrete floors and industrial lighting. She decorated it with colorful posters explaining Ohm's law and basic circuitry, trying to make the technical material more approachable. A coffee maker sat on a corner table, always brewing fresh coffee for students, who often worked night shifts before attending morning classes. The other faculty members treated Sarah with polite respect, though she sensed they found her somewhat mysterious. She attended mandatory meetings but declined invitations to happy hours or weekend gatherings. Her personnel file showed an honorable discharge from the Army and excellent teaching evaluations, but little else. The college administration appreciated her results and didn't pry into her background. Dr. Patricia Vance, the department head, had tried repeatedly to draw Sarah into the social aspects of college life. Patricia was a well-meaning woman in her 50s who genuinely cared about her faculty, but Sarah's polite deflections had eventually trained her to maintain professional distance. Still, Patricia often watched Sarah with curious eyes, sensing there was more to her story than a simple military background. The veterans in Sarah's classes responded to her differently than the other students did. They recognized something in her bearing, a way of moving through space that spoke of training and experience beyond what her official biography revealed. Sometimes when she demonstrated electrical connections with unusual precision, they'd exchange glances that suggested they suspected she'd learned these skills in more dangerous circumstances than a classroom. Marcus Rodriguez, a former Marine, studying electronics after losing his leg to an IED, had approached her after class one day with a question that wasn't really about circuits. "Ma'am, I know this might be out of line, "But what unit were you with?" Sarah had smiled and redirected the conversation to his homework assignment, but Marcus walked away convinced that his instructor understood the weight of military service in ways that went beyond theory. The morning routine that brought Sarah to Building C was carefully constructed to maintain her cover as an ordinary civilian. She shopped at the same grocery store, bought gas at the same station, and followed routes that had become predictable through repetition. Anyone watching would see a woman living a quiet, unremarkable life focused on education and service to students. Her apartment complex was filled with young professionals and graduate students, people too busy with their own lives to pay much attention to their neighbors. Sarah had cultivated relationships that were friendly but superficial, the kind of connections that involved wave across parking lots and brief conversations about weather or weekend plans. She helped elderly neighbors with grocery bags and shoveled snow from walkways without being asked, but deflected personal questions with practiced ease. The transformation from Lieutenant Sarah Chen, explosive ordnance disposal specialist, to Ms. Chen, electronics instructor, had taken months of careful planning. She'd chosen Seattle for its large veteran population and its distance from her former military installations. The city's tech industry provided cover for her electrical expertise, and the Pacific Northwest's culture of privacy suited her need for anonymity. 3 years of careful construction had built this life. 3 years of morning coffee and lesson plans and grading papers late into the evening. She'd become genuinely invested in her students' success, finding unexpected satisfaction in helping veterans transition to civilian careers. The work mattered, even if it didn't carry the life or death stakes she'd once navigated daily, but beneath the carefully maintained surface, muscle memory remained. Sarah still checked exits when entering buildings, still positioned herself with clear sight lines to doors, still felt her heart rate spike at unexpected loud noises. The skills that had kept her alive in Afghanistan hadn't disappeared. They'd simply been buried under layers of ordinary civilian routine, waiting for a moment when they might be needed again. The nightmares still came at 3:47 a.m. Always the same time, always the same dream. Sarah would wake reaching for tools that weren't there, her hands moving through the precise motions of cutting the right wire, while her conscious mind struggled to remember she was safe in Seattle, not crouched over a device that could vaporize a city block. The phantom weight of her bomb suit pressed against her shoulders as she sat on the edge of her bed, waiting for her heartbeat to slow. In her bedroom closet, behind winter coats and forgotten boxes, sat a locked military footlocker that contained the only evidence of who she used to be. Inside lay her explosive ordnance disposal badge, a piece of metal that represented 8 years of walking toward danger while everyone else ran away. The badge showed a bomb with lightning bolts, surrounded by a wreath that symbolized the peace that came after successful disposal. She hadn't looked at it in 6 months. The footlocker also held photographs she couldn't bring herself to display, but couldn't bear to destroy. Images of her team in Afghanistan, 5 specialists who trusted each other with their lives daily. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, who could identify explosive compounds by smell alone. Corporal Jennifer Hayes, whose steady hands had saved more lives than anyone would ever know. Sergeant First Class David Kim, who'd taught her that the most dangerous moment wasn't approaching the device, but the seconds after successfully disarming it, when adrenaline made hands shake. Technical manuals filled the bottom of the trunk. There, pages marked with notes in Sarah's precise handwriting. Advanced IED recognition, chemical explosive analysis, remote detonation systems, textbooks for a war that had no classroom. She'd studied these volumes until she could recite blast patterns and fusing mechanisms like poetry, knowledge that had kept her team alive through 47 successful bomb disposals. Her service record, sealed in a manila envelope, told a story of unprecedented success in one of the military's most dangerous specialties. First woman to graduate top of her class from the Naval School Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Youngest specialist ever promoted to team leader. Only person in her battalion to complete 3 consecutive tours without losing a single team member. Awards and commendations that would never appear on any public record. Classified victories that had prevented massacres. The Bronze Star Citation, written in military language that sanitized the horror, described her actions during the siege of Firebase Echo. Taliban forces had infiltrated the perimeter and planted 17 devices throughout the compound. Sarah had spent 14 hours moving from bomb to bomb, disarming each one while under sporadic gunfire. The citation didn't mention that she'd worked for the final 6 hours with a piece of shrapnel in her shoulder, refusing medical attention until the last device was neutralized. During those Afghanistan deployments, Sarah had developed an almost supernatural ability to read explosive devices. Other EOD specialists talked about feeling bombs, understanding their personalities the way a pianist might understand different instruments. Sarah had taken this intuition to levels that bordered on mystical. She could look at a device and immediately understand its creator's mindset, anticipating modifications and surprises that would have killed less experienced operators. Her team had nicknamed her Whisperer because of her habit of talking to bombs while working on them. "You're trying to be clever," she'd murmur while examining a particularly complex device. "But I can see what you're really doing." The practice had seemed eccentric to outsiders, but her success rate spoke for itself. In 8 years of active duty, Sarah had never encountered a device she couldn't disarm. The transition to civilian life had been brutal in ways the military hadn't prepared her for. The constant alertness that had kept her alive in Afghanistan became a liability in peaceful Seattle. She'd spent her first year jumping at car backfires and instinctively analyzing the structural vulnerabilities of every building she entered. Crowds made her nervous, not because she feared people, but because she automatically calculated blast radii and casualty estimates. Sleep had been the hardest adjustment. In Afghanistan, she'd learned to rest while maintaining hypervigilance, a skill that proved impossible to turn off. Every sound in her apartment building registered as a potential threat. Footsteps in the hallway, doors closing, the mechanical hum of heating systems. She'd installed multiple locks on her apartment door and chosen a unit on the 3rd floor that offered clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. The Army's transition counselors had warned about the psychological challenges of leaving high-stakes military work for civilian jobs. They'd prepared her for depression, anxiety, and the sense of purposelessness that affected many veterans. What they hadn't mentioned was how difficult it would be to pretend that normal problems mattered. Student complaints about test scores felt trivial compared to the life-and-death decisions she'd made daily for 8 years. Teaching electronics had been a compromise, a way to use her technical knowledge without accessing the classified expertise that made her truly exceptional. Her students learned about basic circuits and electrical theory, never knowing their instructor could build sophisticated detection equipment from spare parts or identify explosive compounds by examining wire fragments. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was teaching people to build things while her real expertise lay in taking them apart. Sometimes, late at night while grading papers, Sarah would catch herself sketching circuit diagrams that had nothing to do with her lesson plans. Her hand would move automatically, drawing the electrical signatures of devices she'd encountered in Afghanistan, mapping connections that revealed the bomber's training and psychological profile. She'd stare at these drawings for long minutes before crumpling them up and throwing them away, reminders of a world she'd tried to leave behind. The medications prescribed by the doctor sat mostly unused in her bathroom cabinet. Sleep aids that left her groggy and vulnerable, anxiety medications that dulled the edge that had kept her alive. She'd tried them briefly after her discharge, but found that the chemical fog interfered with her ability to assess threats. Better to stay alert and tired than chemically relaxed and dead. The morning of October 15th began like any other Tuesday at Northwest Community College, with Sarah arriving 30 minutes early to prepare her advanced electronics lab. She unlocked Building C with her faculty key, flipping on the fluorescent lights that buzzed to life over workbenches cluttered with breadboards and components. The familiar smell of solder and electrical equipment filled the air as she began setting up the day's experiment on power supply regulation. Her first class wouldn't arrive until 9 a.m., giving her time to test the circuit boards and ensure all the equipment functioned properly. Sarah took pride in her preparation, knowing that many of her students were already struggling with the transition from military to civilian life. The last thing they needed was faulty equipment, adding to their frustration with complex technical concepts. At 8:45, Marcus Rodriguez wheeled into the classroom, his prosthetic leg clicking against the doorframe as he maneuvered his wheelchair through the entrance. Behind him came Janet Mills, a former Air Force communications specialist whose PTSD made crowded spaces difficult, but who showed remarkable aptitude for electronic systems. 3 other students followed, all veterans pursuing certificates that might lead to stable employment in Seattle's growing tech sector. "Morning, Miss Chen," Marcus called out, positioning himself at his preferred workstation near the back wall. "Ready to fry some more circuits today?" His joke earned tired chuckles from the other students, who were still adjusting to early morning schedules after years of military precision followed by months of unemployment. Sarah smiled and began her standard safety briefing, covering proper handling of components and the importance of checking power settings before energizing circuits. She moved through the classroom with practiced efficiency, ensuring each student had the correct components and understanding the day's objectives. The lesson focused on voltage regulation, a fundamental concept that would appear in everything from phone chargers to industrial control systems. 20 minutes into the class, as students were beginning to build their circuits, the building's fire alarm erupted in ear-splitting pulses. Sarah's military training kicked in automatically, her eyes immediately scanning for exits and potential threats, while her students looked around in confusion. Fire drills were scheduled monthly, but this was Tuesday morning, outside the normal drill window. "Everyone remain calm," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. "Leave your materials on the workbenches and proceed to the parking lot using the nearest exit." She moved efficiently through the room, ensuring no one was left behind while mentally cataloging the students, locations, and physical capabilities. The hallway outside filled with faculty and students from other classrooms, creating a bottleneck. At the main exit, Sarah noticed that the alarm's pattern wasn't the standard fire drill sequence. Instead of steady pulses, it wailed in irregular bursts that suggested an actual emergency rather than a planned evacuation. Her tactical awareness heightened as she guided her students through the crowd toward the exit. Outside in the parking lot, chaos was becoming apparent. Seattle Fire Department trucks were arriving with sirens blaring, their crews moving with the urgent efficiency that indicated a real crisis rather than a routine call. Sarah positioned her students near the designated assembly area while scanning the building for signs of smoke or fire. Nothing was visible from the exterior, but the continued arrival of emergency vehicles suggested something serious was developing. Principal Dr. Amanda Foster appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale as she spoke rapidly into her cell phone. Sarah caught fragments of the conversation that made her blood run cold. Suspicious package. Bomb squad en route. Evacuate the entire campus. The words triggered memories she'd spent 3 years trying to suppress, flooding her consciousness with images of IEDs hidden in schoolyards and markets. Fire Chief Robert Patterson took control of the scene with the practiced authority of a 20-year veteran. His voice carried across the parking lot through a battery-powered megaphone, This is not a drill. We have reports of a suspicious device inside building, and all personnel must remain at least 200 yards from any campus structure until further notice. Sarah felt her stomach drop as the implications became clear. Building A housed the campus library, computer labs, and the main auditorium where morning convocation was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Nearly 300 students and faculty would have been packed into that building if the evacuation hadn't occurred. Her mind automatically began calculating potential casualty figures based on building construction and probable device placement. Seattle Police Department's bomb squad arrived in their specialized truck, a vehicle Sarah recognized from her military training. The truck contained X-ray equipment, robotic disposal units, and protective gear that could withstand significant explosive forces. She watched the technicians unload their equipment with professional interest, noting their methodical approach and communication protocols. Marcus Rodriguez wheeled his chair closer to Sarah, his combat experience making him more aware than the other students of the serious nature of the situation. "Ma'am, this isn't just a bomb scare, is it?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the tension of someone who'd encountered real explosives in Iraq. "That's actual bomb squad gear, not just precautionary equipment." Sarah nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the bomb squad's preparations. "It appears to be a legitimate threat, Marcus. The police wouldn't deploy this level of resources for a false alarm or suspicious package that wasn't genuinely concerning." She paused, watching as the bomb squad's robot was being prepared for deployment. "We need to keep the other students calm while the professionals handle this." Detective Lisa Chang from SPD's Threat Assessment Unit was interviewing Dr. Foster about the discovery of the suspicious package. Sarah positioned herself within earshot, her military training making her automatically gather intelligence about the developing situation. The device had been found in the library's basement storage area by a maintenance worker who'd noticed unusual electronic components and wiring. That didn't belong in a supply closet. As more details emerged, Sarah's unease grew. The maintenance worker described seeing timer mechanisms and what appeared to be sophisticated electrical circuits connected to several large metal containers. The description matched her memory of vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices she'd encountered in Afghanistan, suggesting someone with serious technical knowledge had constructed this device. The bomb squad technicians were suiting up in their protective gear, preparing to enter Building A with their robot to assess the threat. Sarah watched their preparations with growing concern, recognizing the cautious approach that suggested they were taking this threat very seriously. The evacuation perimeter was expanded to 300 yards, forcing everyone further from the campus buildings and confirming that authorities believed they were dealing with a significant explosive device. The bomb squad's robot emerged from Building A after 45 minutes, its camera feed having transmitted images that made the technicians' faces go ashen. Sergeant Mike Kowalski, the bomb squad leader, spoke in hushed tones with Detective Chang while gesturing toward the building with obvious concern. Sarah strained to hear their conversation, catching fragments that confirmed her worst fears about the device's sophistication. Multiple components. Timer mechanism showing active countdown. Appears to be professionally constructed. Kowalski's words carried across the parking lot, causing murmurs of fear to ripple through the assembled crowd. Sarah noticed several faculty members pulling out their cell phones to call family members, while students huddled together in small groups, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Dr. Foster approached the bomb squad with obvious desperation, her administrative training having provided no preparation for managing a potential terrorist attack. "Sergeant, can you tell us how long we have? Should we be expanding the evacuation zone?" Her voice carried the strain of someone trying to maintain professional composure while facing circumstances beyond her experience. Kowalski removed his helmet, running his hand through sweat-dampened hair as he considered his response. "Ma'am, we're looking at a sophisticated device with approximately 6 hours remaining on the timer. The problem is the size and complexity. This isn't something we can simply disrupt with our standard procedures. We're going to need additional resources from the FBI's technical team." The announcement that federal authorities would be called in sent a wave of anxiety through the crowd. Sarah watched as parents began arriving to collect their children from the nearby elementary school, creating traffic chaos as emergency vehicles tried to maintain access to the campus. The situation was escalating beyond local law enforcement's capabilities, suggesting the device posed a threat that extended far beyond the college itself. FBI agent Rebecca Martinez arrived within 30 minutes, her presence indicating that federal authorities had been monitoring the situation from the beginning. She moved with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to high-stakes crisis management, immediately conferring with the bomb squad and local police commanders. Sarah noted her tactical vest and the sophisticated communication equipment that connected her to resources far beyond Seattle's capabilities. Agent Martinez addressed the assembled crowd through Chief Patterson's megaphone, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit. We're treating this as a credible threat that requires federal intervention. The device appears to be designed to cause maximum casualties and structural damage to surrounding buildings." The revelation that they were dealing with a terrorist attack rather than a simple bomb threat fundamentally changed the atmosphere. Faculty members who had been treating the evacuation as an inconvenience now understood they were potential targets of deliberate violence. Sarah observed their reactions with the analytical detachment she'd developed in Afghanistan, noting how civilian populations responded differently to existential threats than military personnel. As the afternoon progressed, the situation continued to deteriorate. The FBI's technical team arrived with sophisticated X-ray and analysis equipment, but their initial assessment revealed complications that made standard disposal procedures impossible. The device incorporated multiple failsafe mechanisms designed to prevent tampering, suggesting its creator possessed advanced knowledge of explosive ordnance disposal techniques. Dr. Foster received a phone call that made her face go white with terror. She immediately sought out Agent Martinez, speaking in urgent whispers that Sarah couldn't overhear from her position with the students. Whatever information had been conveyed clearly escalated the threat level, as Martinez immediately began coordinating with additional federal agencies through her secure communication equipment. The evacuation zone was expanded again, this time to a full half-mile radius that required moving the assembled crowd to a shopping center parking lot 6 blocks away from campus. The expansion suggested that authorities had determined the device's potential blast radius was much larger than initially estimated, implying either a massive amount of explosive material or sophisticated enhancement techniques. Sarah helped coordinate the movement of her students to the new location, ensuring that Marcus Rodriguez's wheelchair could navigate the uneven pavement and that Janet Mills wasn't overwhelmed by the larger crowd. Her military training made her naturally assume responsibility for her unit's welfare, even in civilian circumstances where such leadership wasn't officially expected. At the new evacuation site, rumors began spreading through the crowd with increasing desperation. Someone had overheard that the device contained enough explosive material to destroy several city blocks. Another person claimed their police scanner indicated that similar devices had been discovered at other locations throughout Seattle. Sarah recognized these rumors as the kind of panic-driven speculation that occurred during crisis situations, but couldn't dismiss the possibility that they contained elements of truth. Agent Martinez's team established a command post using mobile communication trailers that appeared to connect them with resources throughout the federal government. Sarah watched their operations with professional interest, noting the sophisticated coordination that suggested this incident was being managed at the highest levels of national security. The presence of military liaison officers indicated that Department of Defense resources might be required. By 4 p.m., 6 hours after the initial evacuation, the situation had reached a critical juncture. The bomb squad's repeated attempts to disable the device had failed, with each intervention triggering additional security measures that made the device more dangerous rather than less. Agent Martinez announced that they were considering a controlled detonation, but the device's location in Building A made such an approach likely to cause catastrophic damage to surrounding structures that the controlled detonation option presented an impossible choice: allow the device to explode on its timer with maximum destructive potential, or trigger it deliberately with slightly less devastating consequences. Either option would result in the complete destruction of the college campus and severe damage to the surrounding residential neighborhood. The elementary school 3 blocks away would need to be evacuated, displacing thousands of additional people. Sarah listened to these discussions with growing frustration, her professional knowledge making her aware of possibilities that the FBI team apparently hadn't considered. She understood the device's probable construction better than she was willing to admit, recognizing design elements that matched techniques used by bomb makers she'd encountered in Afghanistan. The timer mechanisms and failsafe systems suggested specific training that might provide vulnerabilities an experienced EOD specialist could exploit. The sun was beginning to set when Agent Martinez made an announcement that confirmed everyone's worst fears. We've determined that this device is beyond our current capabilities to safely disable. We're coordinating with federal authorities to determine our best course of action, but we must prepare for the possibility that we cannot prevent this explosion. Her words fell over the crowd like a death sentence, marking the moment when hope began to transform into despair. The breaking point came when 8-year-old Emma Patterson wandered away from her mother in the evacuation crowd, her small voice cutting through the adult conversations with a question that shattered Sarah's carefully maintained composure. "Mommy, why is everyone so scared? Is the bad man going to hurt the school where my big brother goes?" Sarah turned to see the little girl standing alone, her mother frantically searching through the crowd 30 feet away. Emma wore a pink backpack, decorated with unicorns, and clutched a stuffed elephant, her wide brown eyes reflecting confusion rather than fear. She represented pure innocence in the midst of calculated evil, and something deep in Sarah's chest cracked open like a dam under pressure. Mrs. Patterson found her daughter and scooped her into a desperate embrace, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain the unexplainable. "We just need to stay safe, sweetheart. The police are working very hard to protect everyone." But Emma's next words cut through Sarah's defenses like a blade through paper. "But what if they can't stop the bad man? What if he hurts people like Daddy did in Afghanistan?" The revelation that Emma's father was deployed in the military, combined with the child's instinctive understanding of danger, triggered something primal in Sarah's protective instincts. She watched the little girl's face and saw every child in every Afghan village she'd ever cleared of explosives. The same wide eyes, the same trust that adults would keep them safe, the same vulnerability that demanded action regardless of personal cost. Agent Martinez was coordinating with her superiors through encrypted communications, her voice carrying across the command post with increasing desperation. Negative on additional resources. Timer shows 4 hours and 17 minutes. Recommend immediate expansion of evacuation to 2-mile radius. The conversation confirmed what Sarah had already calculated. The authorities were out of options and time was running out. Doc Foster approached the FBI command post with Marcus Rodriguez wheeling beside her, his combat experience having led him to volunteer as a liaison between the student veterans and law enforcement. Sarah watched their interaction with growing tension, knowing that Marcus understood explosives from his Iraq deployment but lacked the specialized training needed for a device this sophisticated. "Agent Martinez," Dr. Foster said, her voice hoarse from hours of crisis management, One of our students has EOD experience from Iraq. He's offered to assist your team in any way possible." She gestured toward Marcus, whose scarred hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests with white-knuckled determination. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized the desperation had reached the point where authorities were considering using minimally trained volunteers. Marcus was brave and experienced, but his expertise involved recognizing and avoiding IEDs, not the delicate work of disarming sophisticated devices under time pressure. Sending him into that building would be sending him to his death. Agent Martinez looked at Marcus with the weary expression of someone exploring every possible option. "Sir, what's your specific training and experience with explosive devices?" Her tone was respectful but carried the weight of someone who knew the difference between combat exposure and technical expertise. Marcus straightened in his wheelchair, his military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes. "Ma'am, I encountered over 40 IEDs during 3 tours in Iraq. I know basic construction techniques and have assisted EOD teams with site security and reconnaissance. I understand the risks, but I can't stand here doing nothing while people might die." The conversation crystallized Sarah's impossible choice. She could maintain her civilian cover and watch Marcus attempt a mission that would certainly kill him, or she could reveal her true capabilities and accept the consequences of exposure. 3 years of carefully constructed anonymity weighed against the mathematical certainty that thousands of people would die if this device detonated. Sarah stepped forward before her rational mind could override her instincts, her voice carrying the authority she'd spent 3 years suppressing. "Agent Martinez, I need to speak with you privately. I have information that might be relevant to your situation." Her military bearing emerged automatically, shoulders squaring and spine straightening in ways that made nearby veterans turn to look at her with sudden recognition. Agent Martinez studied Sarah with the sharp assessment of someone trained to evaluate credibility under pressure. Something in Sarah's demeanor must have conveyed authenticity, because she nodded and gestured toward a private area near the command trailer. "Ma'am, any information that might help is appreciated. What's your background?" Sarah took a deep breath. That felt like jumping off a cliff, knowing that her next words would end the quiet life she'd built in Seattle. "Agent Martinez, my name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, former Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist. I have 8 years of experience with sophisticated IEDs, including devices similar to what you're describing. I've successfully disarmed devices that your current team cannot handle." The words hung in the air between them like a confession, marking the moment when Sarah stopped running from her past and embraced the responsibility that had always defined her. Agent Martinez's eyes widened as the implications became clear, her training making her recognize the significance of what she was hearing. "Lieutenant Chen, I need to verify your credentials and clearance level immediately. If what you're saying is accurate, you might be our only viable option." Martinez was already reaching for her secure communication device, understanding that they'd potentially found their solution in the most unlikely place. Sarah provided her service number and security clearances, watching Martinez's face change as the information was confirmed by Pentagon databases. The conversation on the other end of the secure line was brief but intense, with Martinez asking pointed questions about Sarah's specific experience and success rate with complex devices. "Lieutenant," Martinez said after ending her call, "Washington confirms your record and is authorizing me to request your assistance. I have to ask, are you willing to attempt disarming this device? The briefing materials indicate a success rate that exceeds anyone currently available, but the risks are extreme." Sarah looked across the parking lot toward Building A, her mind already shifting into the tactical mode she'd suppressed for 3 years. The familiar weight of responsibility settled over her shoulders like a well-worn coat, bringing clarity that had been missing from her civilian life. This was why she'd been trained, why she'd survived Afghanistan, why she'd been preserved for this moment. "Agent Martinez," Sarah said quietly, "I need access to your technical specifications and X-ray imagery. And I'll need someone to contact. My former commanding officer to verify the specific techniques required for this type of device." She paused, looking back at Emma Patterson sleeping in her mother's arms. "But yes, I'll do it. That's what we're trained for." The Pentagon's response came within 12 minutes, faster than Agent Martinez had ever seen federal bureaucracy move. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number that made her eyebrows rise, direct from the office of the Secretary of Defense. The conversation was brief but decisive, and when she ended the call, her entire demeanor towards Sarah had transformed from cautious hope to profound respect. "Lieutenant Chen," Martinez said, her voice carrying new weight, "I just spoke with General Patricia Hayes at the Pentagon. She says, and I quote, Sarah Chen is the best EOD specialist this country has ever produced. If anyone can disarm that device, it's her. Give her whatever she needs and stay out of her way." The agent paused, studying Sarah with new eyes. "She also mentioned that your last mission saved over 800 civilians in Kandahar." Word of Sarah's credentials spread through the command post like wildfire, carried by FBI technicians and bomb squad members who understood the significance of Pentagon endorsement. Within minutes, the entire atmosphere at the evacuation site had shifted from despair to cautious optimism. Senior officials who had been preparing for catastrophic failure suddenly found themselves coordinating around someone who might actually succeed. Sarah examined the X-ray imagery on Martinez's tablet, her trained eyes immediately identifying the device's construction and probable origin. The bomb showed hallmarks of advanced training, incorporating techniques she'd encountered only twice before, both times in Afghanistan, both times built by the same bomb maker who'd called himself the engineer. Her stomach clenched as she recognized the specific wire patterns and timer configurations that had become his signature. This device was built by someone with professional military training, Sarah announced to the assembled technical team. The failsafe mechanisms are designed specifically to counter standard EOD procedures. Whoever constructed this has studied American bomb disposal techniques and engineered countermeasures for each approach. She pointed to specific components visible in the X-ray. These redundant circuits will trigger detonation if approached using conventional methods. Colonel James Morrison arrived from Joint Base Lewis McChord within 40 minutes, his helicopter landing in the shopping center parking lot with rotors that scattered debris and drew every eye to his arrival. Sarah hadn't seen her former commanding officer in 3 years, but his presence immediately transported her back to the focused intensity of military operations. Morrison approached with the bearing of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "Chun," Morrison said simply, his greeting carrying years of shared experience and mutual respect. "Martinez briefed me on the situation. Are you ready to go back to work?" His question wasn't about technical capability. They both knew she could disarm anything ever built. The real question was whether she was psychologically prepared to resume the role that had defined her military career. Sarah straightened into military attention automatically, muscle memory overriding 3 years of civilian conditioning. "Sir, I'm ready. The device matches patterns from Afghanistan operations. I've successfully disarmed similar constructions under combat conditions." Her voice carried the professional confidence that had made her legendary within EOD circles, but Morrison caught the slight tremor that revealed the emotional cost of returning to this world. The bomb squad technical team gathered around Sarah as she reviewed their equipment inventory, her mind automatically cataloging tools and calculating optimal approaches. Most of their standard equipment would be useless against this device, but she identified several items that could be modified for her specific needs. She requisitioned additional materials from the FBI's technical reserves, components that would Arrive via emergency helicopter within the hour. Dr. Foster approached the command group with obvious anxiety, her civilian perspective making her desperate for reassurance that couldn't honestly be provided. Lieutenant Chen, what are our chances of success? Should we be evacuating more people? Her questions reflected the impossible position of a college administrator suddenly responsible for decisions that could affect thousands of lives. Sarah considered her response carefully, understanding that false optimism would be cruel, but that honesty might cause panic. Dr. Foster, devices like this are designed to be nearly impossible to disarm safely. However, I have successfully dealt with similar constructions before. The key is patience, precision, and understanding the bomb maker's psychology. We have sufficient time if everything goes according to plan. The truth, which she didn't share, was that devices built by the engineer had a mortality rate of 70% among EOD specialists who attempted disarmament. She'd been the only operator to successfully defeat his constructions multiple times, developing techniques that exploited his psychological patterns rather than simply his technical methods. But each success had required perfect execution under impossible pressure. Agent Martinez coordinated with Seattle's Emergency Management Department to expand evacuation procedures while maintaining operational security. The wider public remained unaware that a potential terrorist attack was developing, but emergency services throughout the region were being quietly positioned for mass casualty response. Hospitals were clearing emergency rooms, and the National Guard was being mobilized under cover of routine training exercises. Sarah's former team members began arriving as the afternoon progressed, military personnel who'd worked with her in Afghanistan and understood both her capabilities and the specific challenges she would face. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres flew in from Fort Bragg, bringing specialized equipment that wasn't available through standard civilian channels. His presence provided Sarah with both technical support and emotional grounding. "Chun," Torres said quietly, as they reviewed the device specifications together. "This is him, isn't it? The bastard from Kandahar. Same signature, same psychological games." His recognition confirmed Sarah's assessment and validated her growing suspicion that this bombing attempt was specifically designed to draw her out of retirement. The psychological dimension added complexity that went beyond technical challenges. If the engineer had somehow tracked her to Seattle and constructed this device specifically to force her involvement, then he would have anticipated her standard approaches and prepared additional surprises. She would need to think beyond her established techniques and develop entirely new methods for dealing with his innovations. Colonel Morrison established a direct communication link with Pentagon intelligence services, accessing classified databases. That might reveal how the engineer had escaped Afghanistan and reached the United States. The investigation revealed disturbing intelligence gaps that suggested sophisticated enemy infiltration of American security systems. This bombing attempt might represent only the beginning of a larger terrorist campaign. Sarah suited up and borrowed EOD gear that felt both familiar and foreign after 3 years of civilian clothes. The heavy protective suit restricted movement, but provided psychological comfort, like armor that had protected her through dozens of similar operations. She tested communication systems and verified that her hands remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The final briefing included FBI behavioral analysts who'd studied the engineer's previous work, providing insights into his psychological patterns that might reveal vulnerabilities in his device design. Sarah absorbed their analysis while maintaining focus on technical details, understanding that both psychological and mechanical precision would be required for success. As she prepared to enter Building A, Sarah looked back at the evacuation site where Emma Patterson slept peacefully in her mother's arms. The little girl represented everything Sarah had sworn to protect, every reason why failure wasn't acceptable. This device threatened not just the college but the entire surrounding community, potentially claiming thousands of innocent lives. If allowed to detonate, Agent Martinez offered final coordination procedures while Colonel Morrison provided tactical guidance based on their shared experience in Afghanistan. Both understood that Sarah would be operating beyond their ability to assist, relying on skills and instincts developed through years of walking into situations where single mistakes meant death. "Chen," Morrison said as she prepared to leave. "The command post, remember, you've done this before and succeeded every time. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and come back alive. That's an order." His words carried the weight of military authority, but also the affection of someone who'd watched her grow from novice to master of an impossible profession. Sarah nodded and began walking toward Building A, her steps carrying her away from the safety of the crowd and toward a confrontation with an enemy who had specifically engineered this moment to test her ultimate capabilities. Sarah entered Building A through the main entrance at exactly 6:47 p.m., her footsteps echoing through corridors that had been bustling with student activity just hours earlier. The EOD suit's weight felt familiar despite 3 years away, its bulk a comforting reminder of protection that had kept her alive through 47 successful disposals. Her breathing apparatus created a steady rhythm that helped maintain the calm focus essential for delicate work under extreme pressure. The device waited in the basement storage room, exactly where the maintenance worker had discovered it. But seeing it in person confirmed Sarah's worst fears about its sophistication. 3 large military-grade containers were connected by a web of wires that formed patterns she recognized from her Afghanistan deployments. The timer display showed 3 hours 14 minutes and 22 seconds, and counting down with mechanical precision that made each second feel like a countdown to apocalypse. "Command, I have visual confirmation on the device," Sarah reported through her communication system. "Configuration matches intelligence assessments, but the construction is more complex than X-ray imagery indicated. I'm identifying at least 7 separate triggering mechanisms beyond the primary timer." Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Professional training overriding natural fear responses. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through her earpiece with barely controlled tension. "Lieutenant, what's your initial assessment? Are you able to proceed with disarmament procedures?" The question carried the weight of thousands of lives hanging in the balance, every person in the evacuation zone depending on Sarah's expertise and steady hands. Sarah knelt beside the device, her trained eyes cataloging every component and connection with the methodical precision that had made her legendary within EOD circles. The bomb-incorporated technique she'd encountered throughout her military career, but combined in ways that suggested the engineer had spent years studying her successful disarmament methods and developing countermeasures specifically designed to defeat her approaches. "Command, this device was definitely built by our Afghanistan target," Sarah confirmed, her voice carrying grim recognition. "He's incorporated anti-tampering measures that trigger if approached using standard procedures. I'm identifying pressure, sensors, motion detectors, and what appears to be a secondary timer that activates if the primary system is disturbed." She paused, studying wire configurations that seemed designed to exploit her known techniques. The psychological warfare aspect became apparent as Sarah recognized specific components that had no functional purpose except to intimidate and confuse. The engineer had included elements from devices she'd previously disarmed, creating a twisted museum of her military service that was designed to destabilize her confidence. Red wires connected to blue terminals, timer mechanisms positioned at angles that forced awkward approaches, pressure plates hidden beneath innocuous components. Colonel Morrison's voice joined the communication channel with the authority of someone who'd guided her through similar situations in combat zones. "Chen, remember Kandahar Base 7, same psychological games, same attempt to rush your analysis. Take your time and read the device completely before making any moves. His reminder helped Sarah refocus on systematic analysis rather than emotional reactions to familiar components. Sarah spent 27 minutes conducting a complete visual assessment, photographing every angle and connection for later analysis while building a mental map of the device's architecture. The bomb contained approximately 200 pounds of military-grade explosives, arranged to maximize structural damage and casualty rates. The blast radius would extend well beyond the evacuation zone, potentially claiming thousands of lives. In surrounding residential areas, the first major decision point came when Sarah identified the device's primary vulnerabilities. Standard protocol would involve disabling the timer mechanism first, but the engineer had anticipated this approach and rigged secondary systems that would trigger if the primary timer was disturbed. She would need to defeat 7 separate triggering mechanisms in precise sequence, with any mistake resulting in immediate detonation. "Command, I'm beginning disarmament procedures," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the calm authority that had defined her military career. "Estimated time for completion is 96 minutes, assuming no complications. I need absolute communication silence, except for emergency updates. Any distraction could be fatal." The request wasn't born from arrogance, but from understanding that bomb disposal required complete mental focus. Sarah's hands moved with the precision that had saved hundreds of lives during her Afghanistan deployments, each motion calculated and deliberate. The first triggering mechanism required removing a pressure plate without disturbing the magnetic sensors positioned directly beneath it. She used specialized tools to create a bypass circuit that would maintain electrical continuity while allowing physical access to critical components. 23 minutes into the disarmament process, Sarah encountered the first major complication. The engineer had incorporated a motion sensor that hadn't appeared in the X-ray imagery, hidden within what appeared to be a standard electrical junction box. The sensor would trigger if she approached the primary timer from any conventional angle, forcing her to develop an entirely new access method. The solution required Sarah to disassemble part of the storage room ceiling to approach the device from above, using techniques she'd developed for dealing with overhead explosive traps in Afghan buildings. Working in the cramped space above the ceiling tiles, she carefully lowered specialized tools through openings she created with surgical precision, manipulating components she couldn't directly see. Agent Martinez's voice broke the communication. Silence with urgent information that changed everything. "Lieutenant, we've just received intelligence that similar devices have been discovered in Portland and San Francisco. All 3 bombs are synchronized to detonate simultaneously. You're not just disarming one device, you're preventing a coordinated terrorist attack on the West Coast." The revelation that this was part of a larger operation added psychological pressure that threatened to destabilize Sarah's focus. 3 cities, potentially tens of thousands of casualties, all depending on her success with this single device. She forced herself to compartmentalize the broader implications and concentrate on the immediate technical challenges, understanding that emotional overwhelm would guarantee failure. Sarah encountered the engineer's masterpiece at the 47-minute mark, a psychological trap designed specifically to exploit her known preferences for elegant solutions. The bomb presented 2 equally viable approaches for disabling the primary timer, but one method would trigger a hidden failsafe while the other would succeed. The choice required understanding the engineer's mindset rather than relying on technical analysis. Drawing on 8 years of studying the engineer's work, Sarah recognized his pattern of placing the correct solution in the position that appeared more dangerous. He consistently exploited bomb disposal specialists' natural preference for seemingly safer approaches, killing them with their own caution. The successful method would require accepting apparent risk that contradicted every instinct developed through EOD training, working with tools that seemed inadequate for the delicate precision required. Sarah began the most dangerous phase of the disarmament. The timer showed 1 hour 32 minutes and 18 seconds as she accessed the device's core mechanisms, her hands steady despite the knowledge that a single tremor could trigger an explosion that would be heard from orbit. Every wire cut, every connection modified, brought her closer to either success or catastrophic failure. The breakthrough came when Sarah identified the engineer's fatal flaw. His arrogance had led him to include a signature that revealed the device's ultimate weakness. Hidden within the maze of circuits was a pattern that matched his psychological profile, providing a path to disarmament that bypassed all his carefully constructed traps. He'd been unable to resist marking his work, and that vanity would prove his undoing. With 47 minutes remaining on the timer, Sarah began the final sequence that would either save thousands of lives or end her own. Her training, experience, and intuition converged in a moment of perfect clarity that transcended technical knowledge and entered the realm of art. Every lesson from Afghanistan, every successful disposal, every fallen comrade guided her hands. Through motions that felt like destiny, the timer stopped at 0 hours 0 minutes and 1 second, freezing in digital silence that seemed to echo through the universe. Sarah stared at the display for several seconds, hardly believing that 8 years of training and 3 years of hiding had culminated in this moment of absolute success. The device was neutralized, the threat eliminated, and thousands of innocent lives had been preserved through her skill and courage. "Command, devices neutralized," Sarah reported, her voice carrying exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. "Threat eliminated. All triggering mechanisms disabled. The area is safe for approach by hazmat teams." The words felt inadequate for describing the magnitude of what had just occurred, but they carried the weight of victory against impossible odds. Agent Martinez's voice exploded through the communication system with barely controlled relief and jubilation. "Lieutenant Chen, you've just prevented the largest terrorist attack in American history. Portland and San Francisco teams are using your techniques to disarm their devices. You've saved potentially 50,000 lives today." The numbers seemed abstract, but Sarah understood their human reality. 50,000 people who would go home to their families tonight. Sarah emerged from building at 9:23 p.m. to find the evacuation site transformed into a scene of celebration and relief that stretched beyond anything she had experienced in her military career. Thousands of people who had spent the day in terror were now cheering, crying, and embracing strangers as news of the successful disarmament spread through the crowd. The weight of the EOD suit felt different now, no longer protective armor but a symbol of service that connected her to every person whose life had been preserved. Emma Patterson broke free from her mother's arms and ran toward Sarah with the fearless enthusiasm that only children possess, her small hands reaching up toward the woman who had just saved her world. "Are you the hero lady who stopped the bad man?" she asked, her innocent question cutting through the complexity of the situation to its essential truth. Sarah knelt to Emma's level, removing her helmet to reveal sweat-dampened hair and eyes that reflected both exhaustion and profound satisfaction. "I'm just someone who had a job to do," Sarah replied gently, her voice carrying the humility that had defined her throughout 8 years of military service. "But yes, the dangerous thing is gone now. You're safe, and your brother's school is safe, and everyone can go home." Emma's smile seemed to illuminate the entire parking lot, representing the pure joy of innocence preserved in childhood, protected from the evil that had threatened to destroy it. The media arrived within minutes of the all-clear announcement. Satellite trucks and news crews, creating a chaos of cameras and microphones that transformed the parking lot into an impromptu press conference. Sarah watched their approach with the wariness of someone whose instincts had been trained to avoid attention, but Agent Martinez intercepted the reporters with the smooth efficiency of federal media management. "Lieutenant Chen will not be available for interviews. This operation remains under federal investigation." Colonel Morrison found Sarah near the command trailer, his presence providing an anchor of familiar authority in the swirling chaos of civilian celebration and media attention. "Chen, I've just received confirmation from Portland and San Francisco. Their teams successfully used your disarmament techniques to neutralize both devices. Final casualty count across all 3 cities, 0. You didn't just save Seattle, you saved the entire West Coast." The magnitude of what had been prevented slowly became clear as intelligence reports revealed the full scope of the engineers' planned attack. Each device had been positioned to maximize psychological impact and casualty rates, targeting population centers during peak activity periods. The synchronized detonations would have killed an estimated 47,000 people and injured hundreds of thousands more, creating a traumatic event that would have fundamentally altered American society. Dr. Foster approached Sarah with tears streaming down her face, her administrator's composure completely abandoned in favor of raw human emotion. "Lieutenant Chen, I don't know how to thank you. This morning I was worried about budget reports and faculty evaluations. Tonight, because of you, my students and colleagues are alive to worry about tomorrow's classes." Her gratitude represented the sentiment of thousands of people who owed their lives to Sarah's skill and courage. Marcus Rodriguez wheeled through the crowd with determined purpose, his combat experience making him understand better than most civilians what Sarah had accomplished. "Ma'am, I know you don't want attention, but I need you to understand something. Every veteran here knows what you just did. Walking into that building, knowing you might not come out, choosing to serve even when you didn't have to. That's what real heroes look like." The Veterans Affairs representative who arrived as part of the federal response team brought news that would fundamentally change Sarah's civilian life. "Lieutenant Chen, given the classified nature of your service and today's events, you're being offered a position with the Department of Homeland Security's Special Operations Division. The salary and benefits package reflects the critical importance of your expertise to national security." Sarah considered the offer while watching the crowd of students, faculty, and community members who were slowly beginning to disperse as normal life gradually resumed. The position would provide financial security and official recognition for her capabilities, but it would also mean returning to a world of classified operations and constant readiness for missions that could end in death. She had tasted civilian life and found meaning in teaching students who needed second chances. "I appreciate the offer," Sarah replied after careful consideration, "but I think I'll stay where I am. These students need someone who understands their struggles, and I've found that teaching can be just as important as disarming bombs. Maybe more important, because education prevents problems before they start." Her decision reflected a deeper understanding of service that extended beyond dramatic interventions to the quiet work of building better futures. Agent Martinez coordinated Sarah's transition back to civilian status with the efficiency that marked all federal operations, ensuring that her identity would remain protected despite the day's exposure. "Lieutenant, your service record will be updated to reflect today's actions, but the details will remain classified. As far as the public knows, an unnamed EOD specialist successfully resolved the situation. Your privacy will be maintained." The FBI's investigation into the engineer's operation revealed a sophisticated network that had taken years to establish, with cells operating across multiple states and coordination that suggested foreign backing. Sarah's successful intervention had not only prevented immediate catastrophe, but had also provided intelligence that would enable authorities to dismantle the entire terrorist organization before they could attempt additional attacks. As the parking lot gradually emptied and emergency vehicles began departing, Sarah found herself standing with a small group of students from her morning electronics class. They looked at her with new understanding, recognizing that their patient instructor possessed capabilities that extended far beyond explaining circuit boards and electrical theory. Janet Mills, whose PTSD had made her suspicious of authority figures, spoke for the group with quiet respect. "Ms. Chen, we always knew there was something different about you. The way you moved, the way you looked at things, the way you understood when we couldn't sleep or concentrate. Now we know why. You've been exactly where we've been, and you made it through to the other side." Her words captured the unique bond between veterans who had faced combat and understood its lasting effects. Sarah's apartment, when she finally returned home at midnight, looked exactly the same but felt completely different. The careful anonymity she had constructed over 3 years had been shattered, but rather than feeling exposed, she felt liberated from the burden of hiding her true self. The shadow box on her dresser no longer represented a painful past but a foundation for continued service in new forms. The metal case now held a new addition, a handwritten note from Emma Patterson that read, "Thank you for saving my school," in crayon letters that wavered but conveyed perfect sincerity. The note joined her Bronze Star and Army Commendation Medal as symbols of service that mattered, reminders that the most important victories often went unrecorded in official records, but lived forever in the hearts of those who benefited. Northwest Community College reopened the following Monday with enhanced security measures and a renewed appreciation for the extraordinary individuals who sometimes hide in ordinary roles. Sarah returned to her classroom in Building C, finding that her students' respect for her had deepened, but that their fundamental need for education and support remained unchanged. The work continued, different now but no less important. The electronics lab became an unofficial gathering place for veterans throughout the college, drawn by word-of-mouth reports that Ms. Chen understood their struggles in ways that went beyond academic instruction. Sarah found herself providing informal counseling and advocacy services, helping former military personnel navigate bureaucratic challenges and emotional difficulties that civilian counselors often couldn't comprehend. Dr. Foster established a Veterans Resource Center in the building where the bomb had been discovered, creating a permanent reminder that threats could emerge anywhere but that ordinary people possess the capability to respond with extraordinary courage. A small plaque near the entrance read simply, "Dedicated to those who serve in silence and emerge when needed most." Sarah's story spread through veterans networks across the country, carried by people who understood the significance of someone choosing to remain in civilian service rather than returning to military glory. She became a symbol of the different ways that service could continue after discharge, proof that the most important missions often involved building rather than destroying, teaching rather than fighting. The bomb disposal techniques Sarah had developed during the Seattle operation were incorporated into EOD training protocols, ensuring that future specialists would have the tools necessary to defeat similar terrorist devices. Her innovations saved lives she would never meet, in situations she would never know about, extending her protective influence far beyond the single day when she had emerged from hiding to save 10,000 strangers. 6 months later, Sarah Chen continued to teach electronics to veterans and civilian students alike, her classroom serving as proof that heroism could be found in the choice to serve others regardless of recognition or reward. The woman who had once been called Whisperer for her ability to communicate with bombs had found her true calling in communicating with people who needed someone to believe in their potential for renewal and growth. 1 year after the bombing attempt, Sarah stood before her advanced electronics class on a crisp October morning, watching 23 students work through circuit problems with the focused determination she'd come to love about teaching. Among them sat 3 new faces: former Army medic Lisa Hernandez, discharged Marine engineer Carlos Vega, and Navy communications specialist David Kim, all drawn to Northwest Community College by word that spread through veteran networks about an instructor who truly understood their journey. Emma Patterson, now 9 years old, had convinced her mother to let her visit Sarah's classroom as part of a school field trip studying community heroes. The little girl wore the same unicorn backpack, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had witnessed real courage and understood its value. She raised her small hand during the demonstration and asked, "Miss Chen, how do you know which wire to cut first?" Sarah smiled, recognizing the deeper question behind the technical inquiry. "Emma, the most important thing isn't knowing which wire to cut. It's staying calm under pressure, thinking clearly when everything seems impossible, and remembering that every problem has a solution if you're patient enough to find it." The lesson applied equally to bomb disposal and circuit analysis, to military service and civilian life, to the daily challenges her students faced as they rebuilt their futures. The classroom had evolved into something beyond academics, becoming a sanctuary where veterans could process their experiences while learning practical skills. Sarah had quietly established connections with mental health professionals, job placement services, and financial assistance programs, creating a network that addressed the whole person rather than just their educational needs. Her students' success rate in finding employment after graduation exceeded 90%. But more importantly, they found community and purpose. As the semester progressed toward its end, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Agent Martinez arrived during lunch break with a folder containing classified updates on the terrorist network that the engineer had built. The investigation had led to arrests across 3 countries and prevented 12 additional planned attacks. Sarah's techniques had been shared with allied nations, creating a global defense against sophisticated bombing campaigns. "Lieutenant," Martinez said, using the rank Sarah had never officially relinquished, "I wanted you to know that your decision to stay in teaching has had ripple effects we never expected. 3 of your former students now work for Homeland Security, 2 have joined police bomb squads, and 5 are teaching other veterans essential skills. You're multiplying your impact in ways that military service alone could never achieve." Sarah looked around her classroom, seeing not just educational space, but a command center for a different kind of mission. Every student who found stability, every veteran who discovered a new purpose, every family that remained intact because someone had found hope, these represented victories as significant as any bomb disposal, battles won through patience and dedication rather than dramatic intervention. The ghost who had once walked through Afghan valleys defusing death had found her true calling in a Seattle classroom, proving that the most powerful explosions aren't destructive but transformative. Changing lives one student at a time. If this story of quiet heroism and second chances inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community celebrating everyday heroes who changed the world through service. What's your story of finding purpose after major life changes? Share it in the comments below. We read every single one, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.